The first sound was not a bark but the scrape of claws on earth, a dry whisper that didn't belong to the wind. I was already sweating under the noon sun, the kind that whitens the road and puts a rattle in your throat when it rose again from the ditch, a sound shaped like a plea that had forgotten its words. The weeds along the embankment leaned toward it. A rusted soda can winked and a blowfly worried the edge of a plastic bag. I walked closer, telling myself it was a bird tangled in twine or a goat that would bolt as soon as it saw me. Then the earth shifted into focus, and two amber eyes bloomed out of shade. A German shepherd, or what hunger had left of one, lay corkscrewed at the bottom of the ditch, ribs like the fingers of a hand trying to climb a wall. The clay had dried in plates around his legs. There was no water, only a dark stain where the morning dew had evaporated and betrayed him. He saw me and didn't move. Not because he trusted me, but because he had learned that sometimes surviving looked exactly like being still. The heat pressed its palm over everything. The highway hummed as if it had decided not to listen. I felt my own pulse stumble, then gather itself. "Hey, buddy," I said, though the word felt flimsy against the sky. The dog did not wag, did not whine, did not beg. He blinked, and the blink looked like the smallest word for please a living thing could make. I call this story Crying for Help, Dog Rescued from a Deep Ditch After Days Without Water. But it began before I arrived. With a stretch of country road that trains its travelers to overlook small tragedies in a ditch that had been eroding for years, deepening itself with every storm. The dog's paws were cracked open into pale mouths. His tongue lay behind his teeth like a leaf left under a tire. Flies mapped him. On the far side of the field, a windmill turned with the boredom of a thing that had seen everything twice. I climbed down, sliding on loose grit, and found my shoes arguing with the clay. Up close, the shepherd's smell reached me. "Iron, sun, old fear. Not going to hurt you?" I said. "Which is what you say, because the alternative would be to stand there and admit you've come empty-handed." He turned his head a fraction, so slowly it didn't disturb the fly on his ear. I could hear his breath. It had the rhythm of a saw that needs oil. I reached for my water bottle and discovered it was down to swallows. I was 20 minutes from town, 5 from the creek. Who knows how far from the last time he had a choice that mattered. I poured the little I had onto my palm and held it under his jaw. His tongue touched my skin with the reverence of a pilgrim who finds the door at last. He barely drank. The gesture itself was a rescue. It told his body it could still move toward something that wasn't a lie. I ran. The road leaned uphill and through the sun at my back. The world above the ditch was ordinary. Bees in the ditchweed, the cough of a tractor hidden by corn, the metallic squabble of grackles on a fence. I shouted at the first house I reached, the sound tearing the afternoon in two. A woman with a dish towel and a suspicion stepped onto her porch. "Water." I managed, and the word broke. She came with a hose. Her son dragged a ladder like a knight bringing a lance too big for him. The neighbor in a straw hat appeared with a coil of rope that looked older than his shoulders. We walked back, as if trying not to frighten the ditch back into closing. When we peered over the edge, the shepherd lifted his head a painful inch as though reminded that the world had more than one shape. The boy's mouth made an O. The woman clamped her dish towel at her heart, as if the body could be tricked into thinking it had armor. It smelled like rescue the way summer smells like cut grass, that sudden, human chorus that rises when a thing is about to be changed. We lowered the ladder first, but the ladder argued with the angles. The ditch undercut itself, a small geology of collapse. We spoke in low voices. The man tied the rope into a loop as if he had once been young somewhere near a lake. I slid down again, skinned my palm, heard the clay grind under my weight. The dog watched me like a storm reads a horizon. "We've got you," I said, meaning it the way people mean vows, which is to say absolutely and clumsily. I made a sling with the rope in my jacket, inching the loop under his chest, feeling the heat of him against the heat of me, until they were one kind of fire. He didn't fight, not because he was saintly, but because the ditch had taught him that struggle sometimes cheats. When the rope went taut, his nails scratched a dry song against the clay. The boy braced himself with both feet on the ladder rungs and pulled like a sailor in a story. The woman prayed under her breath in a language I didn't know. The dog rose inches. The world stopped pretending to be big and became only a series of small, exact tasks: lift here, hold there, breathe now. He cleared the lip with a sound like a drawer closing and lay on the grass, startled by its softness. His tongue found water again, the hose stream making a shallow lake in the ditchweed, and he drank the way exhausted men laugh, like it hurts until suddenly it doesn't. He was not saved yet. We made shade with a tarp and a pickup truck bed, the way people make miracles with whatever is near. The man fetched a plastic kiddie pool gone chalky from winters in a shed. We filled it and the dog stepped in obedient to the idea of cool. His body remembered and flinched. His breath shortened and then learned itself. Flies reconsidered their plans. I called the rescue number taped in my wallet for reasons I never expected to need. A voice answered that belonged to a woman who had sorted chaos into lines for 20 years and kept a kindness for emergencies at the top of her desk. She would send someone. She told me to offer small things, water in tiny sips, food later in crumbs measured by the dog's dreams, shade always, silence often. We waited. The boy whispered a name he had made without permission, River. The dog looked up as if the syllables carried a smell. I said it too, and the air sounded a little less bright when I did. He was too thin to shiver. He stood long enough to fail once and did not look ashamed. On the way to the clinic, the road turned into a documentary about sweat. The truck's cab held the musk of hay and sunblock and a life lived outdoors. The woman drove like a person who knows that speed is not the same thing as rescue. The boy rode beside River, who lay on a pile of clean towels and accepted the boy's hand as a fact like traffic laws or gravity. The clinic was a long, low building that smelled of bleach and dog and decisions. The vet's eyes were tired, but her hands were the kind that teach cells to come back to themselves. She listened to River's heart, which sounded like a knock from far away. She tested for what might already be chewing him. Ticks, worms, the invisible bankruptcy's illness declares. She laid a line in his leg and let water return to him by a more patient route. River endured with the grace of a boat, deciding to be a dock for a while. When she touched the pads of his paws, he made a noise that was not pain exactly but was its cousin. She described a plan. The plan was a ladder. We would climb it a rung at a time. He stayed a night at the clinic and woke not angry. When I went back the next morning with a bag of boiled chicken and a heart making messy maps on itself, he lifted his head and made a small, surprised sound. By afternoon he stood, then walked, then sat because someone had said sit. And the world offered him a chance to try obedience as a way of making the noise in his head match the gentle noise of our mouths. The vet cleared him to come home with me for a foster week, which is like an engagement with a clause that says you can break it if everyone agrees it was too much. We rode home slowly. The dog looked out the window not to watch the world but to confirm that it kept happening. In my kitchen the floor was cool and the water tasted like nothing, which is how water should taste when you aren't busy thanking it for existing. He ate the chicken I gave him with the caution of a man returning to a city after years in the forest. He slept and his paws ran in place. I learned where not to touch him, the belly, the back of the head, and where to place my hands, so he learned that bodies could be kind. When the air conditioner clicked on, he looked at me just to check. He fell asleep with his chin on my foot, which is a treaty both sides accept without reading. River learned his name, and then learned he could hear it without it being a threat. In the mornings, the sun made a rectangle on the kitchen tile, and he fit himself inside it like a postcard sliding into its envelope. We walked in short loops, slow enough that each tuft of grass could have told its story twice. The ditch peeled itself from his muscles day by day. When a passing truck hissed, his legs did their old, practicing collapse, and then changed their minds. He met a girl in a yellow dress who kneeled at his eye level and asked, with the manners of the well-taught, if she could touch. He leaned forward like a tide responds to the moon. He found the water bowl without panic. His tail learned the word later. I pretended to work and watched him breathe. I had not realized how loud my apartment had been until River's quiet rearranged it. The man who owned the field with the ditch came by one evening with a rain gauge in his hand and a complicated look on his face. He blamed the county, the weather, the way teenagers throw bottles out of truck windows like goodbye kisses to no one. He did not blame River, which mattered more than it should have. He told me that the ditch had once been a drainage, then a scar, then a habit. He said next month the county would widen it, deepen the slopes, roll fences away from the edge. He said the word safety the way you say a word that owes you money. River eyed him and then eyed me and then put his head down, which is how dogs give you the past without asking if you can handle it. 2 weeks later we returned to the ditch, because it is a rule in stories like this that you stand where you blood once and decide. The weeds had grown back where the rescue trampled its need. The sun was a gentler sword. The woman from the porch waved. The boy bolted down the slope and did the clumsy dance of those who remember ladders as taller than their legs. River stood at the lip, looked down with an expression I will call mathematics, measuring, summing, dividing, and then turned toward the creek. He drank in the shade and shook his head and invented rain. He moved like a sentence that had lost its comma and didn't mind. On the way back, he pressed his shoulder against my thigh once, lightly, as if signing the afternoon without making a big show of it. There was a moment that could have been our tragedy. A storm took a hard left off the noon and found the county sleeping. The power skipped, the gutters lied about their capacity, and the ditch roared itself into a river rehearsing for better gigs. I had the truck. The boy had disobeyed his mother. He slid in mud and twisted his ankle in the old way ankles learn laws. River went down after him not because he is a hero in a story but because he understands falling. I reached the edge and saw my foster dog become a machine built for slope. He put his body in front of the boy and leaned, a wedge in the flow. The way of shoulder in a crowd gives everyone a fair chance to breathe. I got the rope across, the mother pulled, the boy rose, River yielded, and everything came back to the speed of after. The boy apologized in hiccups. River shook water into the sun. We stood together at the lip and let our hearts stutter themselves back into rhythm. I think that is the precise moment my yes became a forever without me noticing I'd said it out loud. Paperwork is the quietest celebration. The rescue woman smiled the way people do when they have stacked miracles into a file cabinet and never once dropped the drawer. My signature decided to be neat for once. River's paw print. Well, we did not ink it. The scar on the top pad is a signature enough. I bought a collar that didn't touch any old story and a leash soft as an apology. We do our rounds now morning and evening, past the ditch that can no longer afford our attention. He likes to pause where the boy throws a ball against the barn. He likes to sniff the fence post that foxes use as a mailbox. He likes to sit when I sit and stand when I stand and sleep when I read, his breath flattening the page and making the words dance. When the wind talks about thirst, he doesn't listen. On the anniversary, I fill a metal bowl and set it under the cottonwood where the sun forgets itself for a moment every afternoon. River drinks and then doesn't. He lies with his chin on my foot, which is a policy now, and watches the light try on the grass. There are ants doing the business of nations. There is a hawk drawing a thin pencil line above us. There is the faint tang of rain that may or may not arrive. His eyes half close and open and closed. My hand lies on his neck in the exact place where the world did not hurt him. I think about how bodies remember their worst rooms and then slowly rent them out to better tenants. The ditch is still out there in the county, and no doubt has already begun to practice being tragic again. But I have learned that rescue is not a single reach of a rope. It is a long apprentice with the ordinary bowls filled, walks taken, storms sat through, old angers asked to wait in the kitchen while tea brews. And River dreams beside me, and the dream does not make his legs run. The air tastes like a promise the day is keeping. In some future someone will pass this way and hear only the sound of bees stitching summer together. They will never know what happened in the hot noon when everything could have stayed the same and didn't. They will not hear the first scrape of claws on earth. But I will, and I will answer it again by habit now, with the only word that ever mattered once it learned how to mean it here. The summer leaned in hard and slow, the way a big man eases his weight onto an old chair, testing it with every groan. By July the county was the color of brittle toast, and the air had picked up that faint, metallic taste that comes before a storm but refuses to deliver one. River found the rhythm of heat better than I did. He learned the map of shade and carried it with him like a private weather. In the mornings he led me down the gravel lane while the sun was still rubbing sleep from its eyes. And we walked past the ditch without ceremony, two figures on a margin, our shadows long and tentative. The weeds had grown back and laced the slope in green stitches. Sometimes you could hear the dry scuttle of field mice trading gossip with crickets. River would stop, lift his head, and read the air like a page, all grammar and breath. Then he'd move on, satisfied the sentence didn't need him in it. He smiled more now, that strange, honest dog smile that isn't a human copy but its own language. Teeth bright, eyes squinting as if he'd looked straight at the sun and forgiven it. Neighbors learned his name the way a town learns a new hymn. The boy with the ladder never forgot to greet him, a two-syllable prayer flung wide across the yard, and River answered with a soft thump of tail, dignified, as if agreeing to be a story they could tell later. When the heat finally broke, it did so with theatrical manners. Clouds boiled up from the west wearing bruises, and the light turned the color of old bruised fruit. You could feel the storm in your molars. I filled bowls on the porch and moved the potted basil inside because there are small, automatic kindnesses that prove to no one in particular you're trying. River paced the threshold, glancing at the window each time thunder rolled its barrel across the sky. The first fat drops hit the dust with a sound like applause after a long silence. We stood under the awning and watched the road turn dark in strips, watched the cottonwood leaves flip their pale undersides, watched the ditch begin its low, surprised mutter. When the rain found its run, it ran hard, and in the tilt of the downpour I saw again the slope, the rope, the boy's ankles slick with mud. River did too. I felt it in the way his shoulder touched my thigh and stayed. Animals do not pretend memory is distant, they let it pass through, rinse, and go. He leaned the way he had leaned into the current for the boy, and I steadied a ghost neither of us invited. The power flickered, came back, thought better of it, and died. The house filled with the quiet of things practicing being themselves without electricity, the clock still, the fan arms arrested mid-gesture, the room lit by honest rainlight. When the thunder softened to a faraway argument and the ditch's song calmed, River exhaled. I didn't know I'd been holding my own breath until his gave me permission to return it. The next week the rescue group asked if River and I would visit the adoption day down at the feed store. The rescued among the rescuers, a living proof that the ladder holds. I wasn't keen on spectacle, River isn't either. But the woman with the cardigan and the stack of miracles in her file cabinet said sometimes you bring a dog like River not to show him off, but to let other scared things smell a future on his fur. We went early, before the sun made the parking lot cruel. They set up a pop-up tent that flapped and tried to learn to fly. Tables appeared with bowls and paperwork and the sacred objects of rural charity, Sharpies, clipboards, hand sanitizer. Pups yodeled from crates, a bark choir working on harmonies. River sat in the shade and read the social weather, ears half, back, eyes soft, tail tapping out a patient code. People came. A man who had been alone too long stood with his hands hooked in his pockets and said nothing for 3 minutes, and River closed the distance for him. Placed his head against the man's leg in that way he has of writing a sentence that ends with a period and a mercy. A girl with a bandage on her wrist asked if broken things could live together without cutting each other, and I told her the truth, that sometimes we bleed a little on the people we love, and the trick is to learn how to hold the towel and not pretend it's not happening. River licked her knuckles once, light as a signature, and the girl nodded to herself like a quiet decision had found its chair. We were turning to go when River stopped. He lifted his nose and curated a specific slice of air. The noise of the adoption day fell away, as if someone had turned the knob from crowd to creaked. He moved toward the back of the store where the pallets are stacked with feed, and the light comes down in dusty shafts that make even flies look holy. Behind the far pallet there was a smell only he seemed to understand, sore, frantic, small. He pressed his shoulder to the gap and then lay down long and patient. And I saw what he was saying. A pup whipped thin, eyes blown wide, ribs and telegrams, pretended to be in a different world by shaking in this one. I knelt and let my hand be nothing more than a place for light to land. River stayed near, his calm like a scent you could pocket. The pup crept out, unsure about the flooring, the air, me. But he believed River the way a child believes a bigger child about the rules of a game. We coaxed him into the carrier without the ancient contest of fear against force. The rescue coordinator laughed through tears, the rare, pretty kind that says the body is cleaning a window. She said, "Well, River just did my job for me, and I thought about ladders again. How once you've climbed one you begin, without trying, to hold it steady for whoever is still at the bottom." Days grew shorter in ways that only animals seem to count accurately. River's coat thickened almost overnight, and mornings took on that silver-blue edge that makes coffee seem like a moral choice. We kept our rounds. He now carried a certain town office, unofficial and absolute, making sure old men seated on milk crates outside the hardware store remembered to scratch exactly between his shoulders, patrolling the elementary school fence at dismissal, so that the right hands found the right softness, checking that the stray cat behind the diner still allowed him the honor of being ignored. He missed nothing and forgave everything except the snap of an empty plastic bag, which always required a stern look and a 3-step retreat before it could be revised into harmlessness. At home he acquired the habit of sleeping half in the sun and half out, as if he believed in a mathematical compromise between brightness and rest. I found new gentleness in my own hands I hadn't known I had. The world didn't change, it never does, not wholesale. But the angles of it felt less argumentative. One afternoon the county crew arrived with a backhoe and orange vests, and the ditch underwent its official penance. Metal bit earth, earth complained, men conferred over blueprints that had been folded, unfolded, and carried salt from lunches in their creases. They softened slopes, set culvert stones like the beginning of a humble cathedral, and seeded the raw banks with a scripted wildness that would, if rain cooperated, become foam flower and switchgrass instead of a trap's invitation. River watched from a noble distance, head high, ownership without arrogance. The boy, taller now, which is an indignity and a miracle, stood with us. "He's different," the boy said, meaning River, meaning himself, meaning the ditch, meaning everything. I said, "We all are," and for once did not feel like I was narrating a lesson. The machinery snarled and then idled and then silenced. The new ditch lay in the light like a healed scar, visible but not tender. River sniffed the rock, turned to me, and sneezed, which is how dogs write footnotes. It means, in case you didn't know, that humor is allowed in serious times. That evening, after the last diesel coughs had gone, after the crew's neon had taken its tired glow home, we walked the improved line. A procession of two, no audience but the hawk. The river beyond wore its late light without effort. You could smell the dust's relief. River paused at the old spot and laid down in the soft dirt, not as a surrender but as a planting. I sat beside him. The earth gave up a slow exhale that might have been trapped heat or might have been something else, and for a moment I could hear again the first scrape of claws on clay, could see the sun bleached white, could taste the lie of thirst on my own tongue, and it was all there and it wasn't, the way stories lodge in muscle and then choose, on kind days, to be souvenirs instead of alarms. River pressed his brow to my shin, precise as a signature, and the day sealed itself. In the late fall, the feed store put up a thank you board, a ragged patchwork of Polaroids and scribbled names, pets with their people, kids with their rescues, River among them, head tilted, the boy's ladder grinning from a memory only we could see. River did not care for his picture, because living things prefer their living to their likeness. He was interested, instead, in a woman who stood too long staring at the notice for a missing dog, her hands wrapped in a jacket she couldn't afford last year. He moved to her and offered the quiet of his presence the way a chair offers a rest without commentary. She told him, because humans offload to dogs without shame, that the world had taken much and returned little. He breathed, and she borrowed his rhythm. That is how a day can be bared. She left before I could say anything that would have ruined the honesty of it. River returned to me and shook one solemn rattle of collar to restore order to the universe. Winter arrived like someone turning down the volume on a long, noisy party. Frost filigreed the edges of windows. The ditch's new stone wore a lace of ice delicate enough to make you speak softer. River tested the slick edge with one careful paw, and then declared it a thing to be admired, not used. We walked later in the day to spare our faces the first rude slap of cold. The sun hardly bothered with its climb, preferring to stretch low and lazy. But when it did scrape across the fields, it gilded everything in a way that made even the stubborn dead stalks look interesting. Inside, River organized our time into a schedule of naps and glances and the important work of monitoring kettle sounds. The storms that came were gentler than the stories I'd heard. They patted instead of punched. On the worst nights he would get up, circle once, and lie down again with one sigh that ironed the bed flat, as if reminding the house that being a home is a task you perform, not a title you claim. And then spring, again, because that is one of the gifts of surviving, arrived with its indecencies green in unprofessional shades, frogs rehearsing too loudly for roles in ponds they had not yet built, wind that smelled of soil and an old promise. We set out water bowls along the edge of the lane and under the cottonwood, a habit that moved through the seasons without having to argue its purpose. The boy, taller again and loping, joined us to set a small sign by the road, a piece of wood he'd burned letters into with an unsteady hand, water for whoever thirsts. River sniffed and approved and drank and did not hoard. That afternoon a stray cat drank and a monarch landed and pretended to drink, and a migrating dog whose ears did not belong to any house in our county paused long enough to take the hint and the kindness, then moved on with a thank you written in dust. I do not pretend that every day after a rescue is a hymn sung in tune. There are mornings when River startles at a dropped spoon and the old ditch wakes up in his muscles. There are hours when my temper, slim and frayed by a human world's tedious harms, tightens my voice into a shape I am ashamed of, and I must apologize with persistence, not just words. There are vet bills, there are groceries sacrificed to a nose that believes in democracy, there is hair in the rug. There are plans interrupted because a friend with 4 feet needs something honest. But the ledger balances in a currency no bank bothers to print. It balances in the way River checks the door once each night and then decides it is on our side. It balances in the way he leans into strangers who have forgotten they are good. It balances in the slow, careful filling in of holes you cannot point to on a body and cannot diagram on a chart. It balances in the simple fact that when I look up from whatever puny problem I've set on fire, he is there, making a shape out of patience I can sit inside until the alarms run out of battery. On the longest day of the year, the cottonwood let down its invisible snow and made summer look like a secret winter. River chased a fleck with a seriousness that belonged to some older dog inside him, the pup who had once needed old water more than air. He caught nothing and felt no lack. The ditch hummed its small, well-drained song. Down river. The real river pulled light down itself like a zipper, and a train crossed a bridge none of us were under, and people in cars were kind or were not, and meals were cooked, and bills were paid, and illness visited doors and was turned away or was let in, and somewhere a dog cried out and some human heard or did not. The world continued with its blunt, beautiful refusal to stop for any one of us. When evening settled, River came to where I sat on the porch step with my mug and my belief in nothing in particular, and he pressed his brow warm and exact against my shin. The gesture had become so familiar in our house that I had stopped noticing the degree of precision it requires, the measure of trust, the geometry of closeness, the gentle insistence of weight that says I am here and you are here and that is, for now, enough. I placed my hand on the back of his neck where no collar would ever rub a story into a scar, and I felt his breath enter and leave the same room mine did. Somewhere, a ditch held its shape, an ordinary scar behaving, a place once designed to drain now learning restraint. Somewhere, a boy slept with both ankles loyal. Somewhere, a woman in a cardigan closed a file drawer on a day's worth of rescues and went home with the light still in her hair. The cottonwood whispered in a grammar older than any county. River's eyes half closed. The heat of his body and the cool of the step met under my palm and negotiated a truce. The night, such as it was, signed its name, and in the soft, unremarkable hush that followed, the kind that never makes movies but saves lives, I heard the only sentence I will ever need to keep repeating until it becomes a reflex as sure as thirst. As gentle as water, we are here. Winter came slowly that year, not with cruelty but with a kind of old man gentleness. A shaking hand laying frost on every fence post, a sigh in the grass that never quite turned to snow. River was older now. The black in his fur had faded into smoke, and the fire behind his eyes had become a warm ember that didn't burn so much as glow. His pace had slowed, his joints clicked softly when he stood, like old stairs reminding you to tread kindly. Yet every morning he still found me, still pressed his brow against my shin before the kettle sang, still claimed the day with that silent promise we'd written together years ago under a hotter sun and crueler sky. Our walks shortened with the daylight. He no longer raced ahead to chase shadows or test the wind's gossip. Instead, he walked beside me, step for step, breath for breath, as though he'd decided that matching my pace was the only kind of running left worth doing. The ditch, now tame and lined with green, no longer meant fear. He would pause there, look once, then turn toward home. Some memories lose their teeth when loved long enough. This was one of them. The land had learned peace, and so had he. Inside the house, River ruled softly. His favorite spot was still by the window, where the morning light poured across the rug in slow gold. He'd lie there for hours, watching the world perform its quiet tricks. Sparrows balancing on wire, a mailman adjusting his cap, a neighbor's cat pretending to be brave. Sometimes, when the wind blew just right, You could hear the whisper of water moving through the new stones in the ditch, and River's ears would lift, then fold back again. A nod to an old enemy turned friend. I'd begun writing again. Not about work or obligation, but about small things, the way River sighed in his sleep, how sunlight could feel like forgiveness when it fell on his fur, how rescue was less an event and more a slow education in staying. The page filled easily. Some stories you live once but spend a lifetime translating. River had become that translation. The dictionary of a better language I hadn't known I was trying to learn. Time, like all loyal thieves, took gently at first. His appetite softened. His naps grew longer. His eyes clouded at the edges like windows filmed by the season's breath. But his spirit, that quiet, deliberate joy, never surrendered. When I'd call his name, he still came, steady and sure, as if answering wasn't duty but choice. The boy from the farm, taller now, sometimes came by after school, dropping his backpack like a forgotten argument, sitting cross-legged beside River to tell him about the world beyond the county line. River would rest his chin on the boy's knee and listen like a priest who'd already forgiven everything. One evening in late March, a storm rolled in. Not fierce, not dangerous, just enough to make the windows murmur and the lights flicker. We sat together in the half-dark, the smell of rain slipping through the cracks. I read aloud from an old book, not because the words mattered but because River liked my voice when it forgot itself. The thunder was far away, only a reminder. He shifted closer, his breath sensing with mine. That was when I realized we had both become the calm we'd once begged the world for. When summer returned, it arrived dressed in mercy. The fields bloomed without begging, the river spoke in soft languages. River's steps grew smaller, his face whiter. He no longer climbed onto the porch alone, so I carried him, my arms remembering the weight of that first rescue, though now it was gentler, more sacred. He'd rest his head on my shoulder as I walked, and I could feel his trust, full and heavy and complete. It was the same look he'd given me the first day, down in that cruel ditch. But now there was no plea in it, only peace. The vet came often kind and quiet. We never spoke about endings, only about comfort. River liked her. He'd sniff her hands and sit patiently while she checked the pulse of his great, steady heart. "He's content," she'd whisper, and I'd nod. There was no higher praise than that. Content, the word itself felt like sunlight filtered through old glass, warm, fragile, eternal. The last night was simple. No drama, no trembling music of tragedy, just the world exhaling into silence. The air was cool, the sky folded with stars. River lay on the rug by the window, where moonlight fell exactly where morning light used to. I lay beside him, my hand on his chest, feeling the soft, familiar rhythm that had once been desperate and now was simply done. His breathing slowed, each exhale lighter, until it wasn't a sound anymore but a memory still vibrating in the air. He left the way good souls do, quietly, without asking for permission, trusting that love would stay to finish the sentence. I buried him under the cottonwood tree by the ditch, the same one that had watched his rescue years ago, the same one that had offered us its patient shade every summer since. I placed a smooth stone over the spot, engraved only with a single word, "Here," because that was the promise we'd kept, that wherever we were, we'd show up for each other, fully, without hesitation. The days after were hollow in the way quiet rooms are. The leash by the door hung like punctuation that didn't know its sentence had ended. The bowl in the kitchen stayed where it was, not as a shrine but as a habit I couldn't break. I kept catching myself turning to share something, the sudden flutter of a bird, the shape the clouds made, and realizing that silence is also a kind of witness. But the grief wasn't sharp. It was wide like the horizon, something you didn't overcome, just learned to walk beside. Months passed. Seasons kept their bargain. The ditch bloomed wild again, seeded by wind and chance. One morning as the sun rose in that same old faithful way, I saw a shadow moving near the field, small, unsteady, a pup maybe 6 months old, ears too big for its head, standing exactly at the lip of the ditch. It looked half-starved, half-curious, the way beginnings always do. When it saw me, it hesitated. The air between us was the same distance I'd once crossed years ago. I knelt, held out my hand, said softly the only word that ever starts anything worth finishing. "Hey." The pup tilted its head, measured the sound, and then, after a long, thoughtful pause, took one cautious step forward. Its paws found the earth that had once betrayed another life and held firm. Behind me, the cottonwood rustled, a breeze maybe, or something kinder. and for a moment I swear I could feel the weight of a familiar brow against my shin, steadying me, guiding me, whispering that rescue never really ends. It only changes form. I smiled and waited. The pup came closer, and somewhere between his first step and mine the story began again, not as repetition, but as proof that love, once learned, never unlearns its way home. Years have a way of softening even the hardest landscapes, both in the earth and in us. Seasons circled quietly, each one tucking a little more distance between that first desperate rescue and the man I became because of it. Rivers graved beneath the cottonwood had settled into the soil's memory, wildflowers had colonized the mound like faithful tenants, and the ditch nearby no longer whispered of danger. It sang of time. The town had changed too. People began calling that stretch of road Rescue Bend, and though I never asked for the name, I couldn't help but smile every time I saw it printed on the new street sign. The paint fresh, the letters bright, the irony unspoken. In River's absence, silence had become both companion and teacher. But silence also births new purpose. The boy from the ladder, now a young man with a steady voice and calloused hands, visited one evening, standing at the gate with the same nervous grin he'd worn as a child. "We could do something, you know," he said. "Something for the others like him." That one sentence was a match struck in the dark. Within months, the two of us had cleared out the old hay barn behind my house and built it into a shelter. Modest, smelling of sawdust and hope. We called it River's Echo. The first rescues were local, strays from the next county, injured wanderers found after storms, dogs whose owners had left more than furniture behind when they moved. It wasn't a business, it was a promise. I handled the nights, the feeding, the wounds, the quiet hours when fear returns to test what progress daylight made. The boy, now Ethan, handled the mornings, turning chores into lessons for the neighborhood kids who came to help. They'd sit cross-legged with notebooks full of drawings, learning patience one paw at a time. I often caught myself watching them and thinking this is what River left me, not grief but a blueprint for kindness. One evening, a delivery truck pulled up with a donation crate. Inside was a brass plaque wrapped in brown paper. It read, "For River, who reminded us that no life is too far gone." We mounted it above the gate. For a long time, I couldn't bring myself to look at it without the throat tightening that comes before tears. Eventually that feeling softened too, into pride, into peace. The new puppy I'd found months before, I called him Ash for the color of his ears, had grown into a spirited guardian of the shelter. He carried some of River's grace in him, that unspoken understanding of when to approach and when to wait. Sometimes when he lay by the cottonwood at dusk, I could almost see River's shape overlapping his, like two songs finding the same note. The shelter had become a living extension of what started in that ditch. One dog teaching another how to trust, one life proving to the next that rescue was possible. The circle had widened, but the center remained the same. The night the flood came, I was in the barn cleaning the feeding troughs when the radio cut to static. Then sirens. The kind that wear urgency without apology. The river had burst its banks 10 miles west, swallowing fields and fences alike. I grabbed the flashlight, the raincoat, the truck keys, and Ash followed, tail tucked but determined, as if he already knew this was the sort of night where history repeats itself in new shapes. By the time we reached the road, the rain was speaking in tongues, the sky throwing handfuls of water like it meant to erase everything that wasn't nailed down. Headlights cut through sheets of silver. I followed a line of flashing hazard lights to where the road dipped into what used to be a creek and was now a furious torrent. 3 volunteers from the fire department waved us down. Cattle out, couple of dogs too. One shouted over the rain, "We can't reach the far pen. Water's rising fast." I left the truck and waded in. The cold bit through the denim like memory. Ash followed, barking once, a short, precise command that steadied me more than any human voice could have. We crossed the first fence line, half submerged, the mud sucking at our boots and paws. Then came the sound. Not of water, but of whimpering. I swung the flashlight. A crate had wedged itself against a fence post, tilted on one corner. Inside, 3 small pups, soaked and trembling, their eyes wide enough to hold the entire storm. Ash barked again, sharp and rhythmic, as if to say, "We've been here before. Remember how?" I crouched, bracing my knee against the current, pried the latch open, and lifted one pup after another into the crook of my jacket. They clung, claws and breath and desperation. When I turned, the world tilted, the mud giving way. Ash lunged forward, caught my sleeve in his teeth, and pulled, his growl cutting through the water's roar like a wire pulled taut. Somehow we found footing. Somehow we didn't fall. We carried them back to the truck, handed them off to the firefighters, then went for more. The water rose higher, the sky lowered. My muscles screamed the way they had years ago under that bridge. I looked at Ash, soaked, panting, but bright-eyed, and realized this was River's legacy manifest, breathing beside me, refusing to let go of a stranger's life. By morning, the storm had broken. The horizon was awash of bruised light. The pups slept bundled in towels in the barn, 3 heartbeats syncing with the hum of a generator. Ash curled beside them, head low, guarding the next generation of survivors. I sat on a crate, drenched and shaking, and thought of the first time I'd said hey to a creature that couldn't answer. And I smiled, because now, it wasn't silence that replied, but a chorus. Years from now, I will walk that same road again. Older, slower, but no less certain. The cottonwood will still be there, though its branches will bear the dignified limp of age. Beneath it, the grass will grow in a perfect circle, a living halo for the one who started everything. I will bring no flowers. Flowers wilt and River never liked them much. Instead, I will bring water, fresh, cold, poured from the same battered metal bowl that once sat by my door. I will tip it gently into the earth, watch it sink, and know that somewhere below, the roots are drinking for both of us. The shelter will outlive me. That's how it should be. I've written the papers, signed the deeds. Ethan will run it with the same stubborn kindness he inherited not from me, but from the world River built in him. The brass plaque still gleams on the gate, catching every sunrise as though polishing the day for good use. Sometimes when dusk comes low and the wind carries just the right scent of wet soil and river air, I could swear I hear the faint rhythm of pause, not heavy, not hurried, just familiar. Maybe it's memory, maybe it's love refusing to stop echoing. In either case, I no longer chase it. I sit still and let it find me, because what remains after rescue isn't a story, it's a rhythm. The sound of a bowl filling, a leash hanging, a door opening to a trembling creature that doesn't yet know it's safe. It's the moment a hand reaches down, steady and unafraid, and the world rearranges itself around that gesture. I've learned that every act of kindness writes itself into the ground. You can see it in the way weeds bloom around old fences, or how water bends differently where someone once knelt to save something small. Rescue is contagious if you let it be. When my time comes, I hope someone finds me the way I once found him. Not because I called out, but because they were listening, and maybe they'll whisper hey into the quiet just to see if the world answers back. And if it does, if somewhere, somehow, they hear the faint scrape of claws on earth or the soft thump of a tail, they'll know what I've known all these years, that love, once given freely, never dies. It only learns new ways to arrive. The first morning Ash led the volunteer group alone, the world looked newly washed, as if dawn had personally chosen to shine brighter over River's echo. His paws left small dark prints on the dewy ground, each one deliberate, proud. The children followed behind, laughing softly, carrying feed bowls that clattered like nervous applause. I watched from the porch, coffee cooling in my hands, realizing that leadership in dogs is quieter than we ever give it credit for. Ash didn't bark orders, he simply was calm, certain, the way light fills a room without asking permission. The barn, once an echo chamber for River's name, now pulsed with new life. 20 dogs filled its space, some trembling, some loud, all learning the grammar of trust. Ash moved through them like a teacher checking the homework of hope. He nudged a young mutt too shy to eat, pressed his nose against the flank of an anxious shepherd, lay down beside an old terrier who'd stopped believing in touch. Watching him, I understood rescue had outgrown me. It was no longer a human act but a tradition spoken through fur, breath, and heartbeat. Ethan, now in his 20s, handled the paperwork and the people. He had River's patience in his bones and the steadiness of someone who'd seen fear turn back into gentleness more times than most. When visitors came to adopt, he'd tell them River's story. Not the tragedy, but the turning. He wasn't just saved, Ethan would say, scratching Ash's ears. I learned to save. And that's what they do here. They learn to save one another. In the evenings, the shelter glowed warm against the dark. Ash would curl near the gate, waiting for the last volunteer to leave, his eyes following the headlights down the gravel road. Sometimes he'd look back toward the cottonwood tree, the one that marked the beginning of everything. I like to think he saw more than memory there, that he felt the same quiet approval I often did, like a voice carried in the wind saying, "You did well." A year later, the town council awarded River's Echo a small grant. They called it an institution of compassion, though to us, it was just a barn that never learned to close its doors. We built an outdoor run, a small veterinary wing, and a shaded corner where the old or unadoptable dogs could live out their days surrounded by hands that never gave up. Ash ruled over it all like a gentle monarch, not commanding, just assuring. By the 5th summer, his muzzle had silvered. Age had found him, but so had peace. When new rescues arrived, scared, hollow, unwilling to meet anyone's gaze, Ash was always the first to greet them. He'd sit nearby, not touching, not staring, just being. Within hours they'd inch closer. Within days they'd lie beside him. It was the same magic River had once worked on him, passed like a secret recipe from soul to soul. Every night before closing, I'd walk the grounds. The sound of crickets mixed with the gentle sighs of sleeping dogs. Ash would follow me partway, stop at the cottonwood and watch. That look, that quiet, knowing gaze, said more than any thank you ever could. I'd scratch behind his ears and whisper, "You've done him proud." He'd blink once, slow and grateful, before settling back under the stars. When Ash finally left this world, he did so the same way River had. Quietly, without complaint, his head resting in the grass outside the shelter's gate. We buried him beside River, under the same wide tree. The two graves, side by side, looked less like loss and more like punctuation, not the end, but a pause in an ongoing sentence. The years after Ash's passing moved like slow water, clear, deliberate, and impossible to hold. The world didn't rush anymore. It breathed with me. My hair whitened the same way the cottonwood did each spring, and my knees developed their own language of complaint. The barn had outlived my strength but not my devotion. Every morning I still walked its narrow aisles, the air thick with straw and memory. Dogs came and went, each carrying a fragment of the first story written in that ditch so many years ago. Ethan ran the place now with an ease that made me proud. He had learned to balance books and broken hearts in the same hands. When I sat on the porch, he'd bring me reports, adoptions made, donations received, dogs still waiting. I'd listen, nodding, knowing the real numbers were written elsewhere in wagging tails, healed scars, and laughter echoing across the field. My role had changed. I became the old man people visited for advice or for the comfort of being told it would all work out. Sometimes the volunteers would bring a frightened new rescue to meet me, saying, "Let him smell you, he'll know." And they always did. The dogs seemed to recognize something older than fear in me. Maybe they smelled River, or Ash, or the quiet residue of 1,000 gentle touches. They'd sit by my chair, sigh once, and let the world begin again. The cottonwood grew enormous, its roots reaching so far that they brushed the foundations of the barn. On summer nights, when the wind moved through it, the leaves made a sound like distant applause. I liked to think it was River and Ash keeping watch, shaking the air with approval. I'd sit out there until dusk blurred into indigo, watching the horizon blur into the same soft shapes I'd once feared losing. My house was full of small mementos, the first rope we'd used to lift River, the brass plaque from the shelter, the faded collar tags that jingled like polite ghosts when I passed. Each one carried weight, but none of them hurt anymore. That's the mercy of time. It sands the sharp edges off love until all that's left is shine. One winter evening, Ethan found me in the barn asleep on a stool, an old shepherd curled at my boots. "You should rest," he said, his voice gentle but carrying the same authority I'd once used on him. "I am," I told him, smiling. And I was, resting in the kind of peace that can't be bought or built, only earned by staying kind through the long weather. In spring I caught pneumonia. It came quietly. Like a guest I didn't bother to turn away. The doctor said rest, but rest is different when it's final. I moved my bed to the window so I could see the cottonwood. The staff kept the barn running, the dogs still barked at dawn, the world didn't pause. That comforted me more than anything. One afternoon, Ethan came in with a young volunteer and a new rescue. A golden pup with eyes like unpolished amber. "He's scared of thunder," Ethan said. "Thought maybe you could talk to him." The pup stood trembling at the edge of the room. I patted the blanket beside me. "Come here, son," I whispered. It took time, but he came, the way all things worth saving do. When his head rested on my palm, I felt the old rhythm again, that fragile, unwavering heartbeat that says we're here now. That's enough. I told Ethan then what I'd been writing in my head for years. The story of River, Ash, and every soul that passed through River's echo. I asked him to keep telling it, not as a history but as a promise. People forget goodness exists unless you show it to them, I said. He nodded, eyes wet but steady. That night, the air smelled of rain and distant cut grass. I heard the wind through the cottonwood, and it sounded like paws on gravel, like the breath of someone faithful waiting at the door. I closed my eyes. For a moment I was back under the bridge, the scrape of claws, the shimmer of heat, the trembling life in my hands. Then the memory folded into light, and the light became everything. When they found me the next morning, I was still smiling. The golden pup slept by my arm peaceful. Outside, dawn painted the barn in gold, and a breeze moved through the cottonwood leaves, shaking loose a few that landed softly on the grass. Two of them side by side, the shape of a resting heart. They buried me beside River and Ash, under that same old tree. The town came, not out of grief but gratitude. They placed fresh water bowls at every corner of River's echo and carved one more word into the shared stone. Home. The town changed, but it didn't forget. They called it the Cottonwood Ceremony. Every spring, on the day the first green buds appeared on that broad old tree, the people of the county gathered at River's echo. It wasn't solemn like a memorial. It was alive. Children ran between the kennels, farmers brought hay, shopkeepers arrived with boxes of treats, and every soul seemed to know they were standing in a story that had outlived its tellers. Ethan was at the center now, older, sun-browned, sleeves rolled up, River's same calm confidence settling behind his eyes. He'd built more than a shelter, he'd built a movement. Under his care, River's echo grew from a barn into a sanctuary, 3 fenced fields, a small medical wing, a volunteer program that stretched across neighboring towns. But even with new walls, new tools, new hands, the place had the same smell, straw, soap, and something indefinably hopeful, like the breath before laughter. That morning, he stood by the gate as the wind came soft through the valley. Beside him was a young girl, maybe 12, holding a pup that shook as though born out of thunder. She asked, "Who are River and Ash?" Ethan smiled. "They're the reason this place exists," he said, pointing toward the cottonwood tree beyond the field. "That's where it started. A man found a dog once, and the dog found the man right back. They taught us that saving one life can save hundreds more." The girl listened the way only children do, with her whole face. "Will the dog remember him?" she asked. Ethan looked toward the hill where 3 stones rested under the cottonwood, the newest engraved simply home. The sunlight slipped through the branches, scattering gold. "I think they remember each other everywhere," he said. "That's what love does, it keeps finding ways to stay." When the crowd quieted, Ethan lifted the microphone, but he didn't give a speech. He simply read the same line carved into the plaque at the entrance. River's line. "No life is too far gone." The words were enough. You could see them ripple through the people like the first breeze of spring through new leaves. They didn't applaud. They just stood soft-eyed, knowing. Afterward, volunteers opened the gates and let the dogs run. Dozens of tails cut through the sunlight, paws kicking up a storm of dust and joy. Laughter spilled like warm water. In those moments, River's echo wasn't a shelter. It was a cathedral built on movement, noise, and trust. A place where kindness had learned to breathe on its own. The girl with the trembling pup crouched in the field. The dog, thin, shy, unsure, looked up at her. She reached out, whispering words the way one might whisper prayers to the wind. Carefully, the pup stepped forward, pressing its head into her palm. Ethan saw it happen and smiled. Another beginning born inside the endless middle of things. As the sun began to lean west, the crowd thinned. Families went home with new companions. Volunteers stacked bowls and leashes, and the laughter faded into the hum of insects. Ethan lingered near the cottonwood. The tree had become vast, its bark ridged like an old map, its branches wide enough to hold shadows of every creature that had rested beneath it. Beneath its canopy lay 3 graves and 1,000 invisible echoes. He knelt there, brushing the leaves from the stones. "You'd laugh at how busy it's gotten," he murmured. "We've got sponsors now. School kids come every week to walk the dogs. Some of them say they want to be vets. Others just come to sit with the shy ones." The breeze moved through the branches, whispering the soft applause of leaves. "I still feel you here," Ethan said. "Every time a dog looks at me like he's deciding whether the world is worth another try. I hear your voice telling me to wait." to let him come in his own time. He stayed like that for a while, the shadows of branches crossing his shoulders. The sun set in slow ceremony, painting the sky in that familiar copper that always belonged to River's story. As he rose, something brushed against his leg. The new pup, the one the girl had brought. It had slipped from her arms and followed him up the hill. It looked at him, ears tilted, waiting. Ethan smiled and crouched down. "You've got good timing," he said, scratching behind its ear. "That's how it always starts." They walked back together through the field. The cottonwood's shadow stretched long behind them, covering the 3 graves like an embrace. That night, when the last light in the barn went out, the shelter glowed softly in the moonlight, a patchwork of fences and dreams. Crickets sang, the dogs settled, and far beyond the fields, the river moved with its quiet, forgiving rhythm. Ethan sat by the porch with a mug of tea, looking out over the land. The wind brought the scent of rain. Somewhere near the cottonwood, an owl called, and the echo sounded almost like a name. He closed his eyes. For a moment he could see them, the man, River, and Ash, walking the field together, bathed in the same light that watched over him now. He didn't feel alone. He felt connected. A single note in a song still being written by countless gentle hands. Around him the world pulsed with small mercies, water bowls filled, fences mended, a dozen hearts sleeping safely for one more night. When dawn finally rose, the light touched everything evenly. The graves, the barn, the hill, the people who would soon wake to continue the work. Ethan whispered, "We'll keep it going." And the world, as if answering, rustled through the leaves of the cottonwood and replied, "We know." The cottonwood stands taller now. Its roots drink deep from the same earth that once held fear, and its branches shade 3 graves that no longer speak of loss but of love fulfilled. Every spring, it blooms in white and gold, scattering petals like small blessings across the field. The wind moves through its leaves with a voice that sounds like distant laughter, and if you stand quietly enough, you can almost hear paws brushing against grass, not ghosts but memories that never learned how to die. At River's echo, mornings still begin with the same symphony, the clink of food bowls, the shuffle of paws, the laughter of volunteers opening gates to the waiting light. The barn smells of hay and rain, of fur and clean water. Somewhere a child kneels beside a frightened dog and whispers patience into its ear, the same way a man once whispered to River beneath the bridge. Kindness, it seems, is hereditary, passed down not through blood but through touch. Ethan runs the shelter now with the calm rhythm of someone who understands that saving lives isn't about grand gestures. It's in the small things, the steady refill of a water bowl, the soft word offered to a creature too scared to believe it's safe, the decision, made over and over again, to stay gentle in a world that often forgets how. Each year, people still come to the cottonwood ceremony. Some bring flowers, others just stories. They read the names etched into the shared stone, River, Ash, home, and leave behind promises written not in ink but in the quiet way they live afterward. The shelter has grown, but its heart remains the same. Every dog that crosses its threshold carries a piece of River's story within it, a reminder that even in despair, there is always a hand waiting to reach down. Sometimes, when the evening settles and the sky lowers its voice, Ethan sits alone by the tree. The day hums itself to sleep, the last bark fades, the last bowl is cleaned, and the air grows soft enough to remember. He closes his eyes and listens. He hears the wind, the heartbeat of the earth, and, somewhere between them, the soft rhythm of River's breath, the echo of paws that once led the way. And he smiles, knowing that the story didn't end. It simply changed narrators. Beyond the fields, the river glints with moonlight, pulling at the edges of the world the way memory pulls at the heart. Gentle, unrelenting, faithful. In that reflection the world seems quieter, kinder. The boy has become a man, the man has become a legend, the dog has become a lesson. And if you drive down that road on any given morning, you might pass a sign that reads Rescue Bend. You might not know what it means. But if you slow down, just for a breath, you'll feel something in the air, an invisible pulse. It's the sound of love that refused to quit, the echo of a promise kept beneath a bridge long ago. The story of River lives there, in the cottonwood leaves, in the footsteps of every rescue that follows, in the hearts of people who may never meet him but will somehow live by what he taught. Because kindness, once started, does not end. It ripples outward, unseen but unstoppable, like water finding its way through stone. And as dusk paints the field in gold one last time, the world feels briefly perfect. The wind carries a single word, small, human. Eternal, the same word whispered years ago to a frightened dog at the bottom of a ditch. Here,